Hello, I'm Will. Welcome to the Digital Imaging channel, and today we're going to talk about how you can figure out if you have 100 foot or 215 foot microfilm. So microfilm comes in two lengths, 100 and 215 feet, and it's important that you know the difference because if you decide to scan your microfilm, you could have a different price or cost for your scanning project based on which type of microfilm you have. So we have here one roll of 16 millimeter 100 foot film, and there are a couple different ways to determine what type of film you have, and one of them is actually by taking the density of the film, which I'll do now. And I have these things called calipers, which you may or may not have. If you have them, you're very lucky and you can tell, but it's one way to determine what kind of film you have. So I'm going to take the caliper, put it over the film, squeeze it down, and I'm going to try to get you focused here. So it should be at the 0.004 inches mark, which it is. So 100 foot film is 0.004 inches in thickness. And actually, I'm going to get right back up. What we have here is 35 millimeter film. You can see it's a little wider. We'll show you how to measure that later on. But 35 millimeter film is also 100 feet in length. So what we have here is also 0.004 in thickness because it's thick 100 foot film. 100 foot film, that's the thickness. That's why the kind of nickname for 100 foot film is thick film, because it's thicker than the 215 foot film called thin film, which we will show you soon. Now, 16 millimeter film is the type that comes in both 100 foot and 215 foot length. The 35 millimeter film, this thick kind here, that's only going to be 100 feet. And what you usually see on 35 millimeter film are oversized documents such as newspapers or engineering drawings, things like that. The 16 millimeter film, it's thinner, or not as wide, I should say. And that's going to be office-sized documents, checks, things like that. So some of this stuff is hard to tell if you don't actually have it in front of you, but I'll show you a couple ways you can figure out which type you have. So 100 foot film is called thick because it is thicker. It's a little stiffer. So what you can do is sort of squeeze the film a little bit, and what it sort of feels like is sort of like cardstock. It's a little bit thicker. It's going to have some sort of bounciness to it, I guess you could say. It's not going to be super easy to bend. You're going to have to put a little pressure on the film to make it bend a bit. Now, with the 35 millimeter film, you don't need to do the squeeze test because you're not going to have 215 foot 35 millimeter film. It's going to be 100 feet in length. Now on to 215 foot film. Like I said before, that is nicknamed thin film because it is actually thinner than the 100 foot film. Let's get our trusty calipers again. So this looks the same, 16 millimeter film. It looks like the 100 foot film. But I'm going to take a caliper here, squeeze it together, and let's get focused here. And you'll see it's 0.0025 inches in thickness. So it's about half the thickness of the 100 foot film. So yes, if you don't have calipers, it might be a little tricky to figure out exactly what you have, but like with the 100 foot film, you can do the squeeze test, and you're not going to be able to feel it through the camera, but when I squeeze this, it's more like just a normal sheet of paper, almost kind of. It just bends really easily. So what you can do is, if you do have a number of rolls, a lot of big collections of film have mixed 215 and 100 foot film, but if you take two side by side and you squeeze them, there's a pretty drastic difference in the sort of pressure you need to apply to squeeze the 215 foot film, which is thin like a sheet of paper, and then the 100 foot thick film, which again is kind of like, call it a cardstock. There's a distinct difference in thickness. If they're all the same, you might have a little difficulty figuring it out, but if it just bends super easy, you don't really have to put much pressure, it's probably thin 215 foot film. Now on the 100 feet, 16 millimeter rolls, you're going to have roughly 2,500 images, whereas on the 215 foot film, somewhere between 5,000 to maybe 20,000 images, depending on the reduction ratio and how small the images were made. But basically, you're doubling the length of the film, so you're going to have a good number of images more than on the 100 foot. Also, something to consider, what you have here are multiple images per frame, so they're doubled up. That's called duplex. If you have duplex film, it's very likely that it's 215 feet in length. Not always, but very likely. Now what we're going to show you next is actually measuring the film, the width of it, with a ruler, so you can see how wide it is and that. Okay, so quickly to tell the difference between the 16 millimeter and 35 millimeter. Again, it's pretty visually distinct, but you can measure it as well. So what I'm going to do is slip some of this film under this ruler here. So that's a 16 millimeter. Here's a 35 millimeter. I'll adjust this so you can see it a little better. So let's just start right about there at the 8-inch mark, and right here at the 6-inch mark, excuse me, 6.5-inch mark. All right. So you can see there's a pretty distinct thickness there, and the 16 millimeter film is about 5/8 inch wide. The 35 millimeter film is about 1.5 inches wide. So if you're not sure, you can at least get a ruler out, and those are going to be the differences in the 100 foot film. Now the 215 foot film, I'll grab that very quickly here. It's also 16 millimeters, so there is not going to be a difference in the thickness. This is also, let's get it under here. Straighten it out a bit. It's the same thickness as the 100 foot film. No difference, both 5/8 inch. So you're not going to be able to tell the difference between 100 foot and 215 foot 16 millimeter film because they're the same width. So now you know a couple different ways to determine if you have 100 foot or 215 foot film. 16 millimeter, 35 millimeter. The 35 millimeter is going to be 100 foot. If you have these, you're going to have roughly 1,000 images or frames per roll if it's full, and it's going to be 100 feet length. The 16 millimeter, that's where you're going to see the difference between 100 foot and 215 foot film, and the way to tell the difference, because from here, they look the same. But the way to tell the difference is, one, if you have calipers and you can measure it, fantastic. If you don't, you can do the bend test and see, is one distinctly thicker than the other. If it's very thin and kind of bends like paper, you probably have 215 foot film. And then lastly, how the images are laid out on the film. If you have duplex, 2 images per chunk, basically, per frame, it's very likely you have 215 foot film, at least as an estimate. So it will be important going into a scanning project which type you have, so it is good to know. And that's how you're going to figure out if you have 215 or 100 foot film. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.